Shalom, shalom. I'm Rabbi Scott with Beth, Yeshua, Messianic Synagogue in Fort Myers. Pleased to come to you this evening from my home, as it is. This is where my midweek recordings are done, and we're continuing to record here from our home midweeks, even after we have resumed services at Beth Yeshua. We have indeed resumed services. Shabbat, 11 a.m. So if you're looking for a place to fellowship and gather, then we encourage you to join us on Shabbat at 11 a.m. The services are also broadcast, live streamed on this same YouTube channel. If you've managed to find us here, we just pray that this is a blessing to you. Our desire is to go through the Torah portions week by week, according to the traditional calendar, and just examine what's being said in the Torah portion and study it out a little bit. We spend a little bit of time together on these evenings, and just a delight to be able to study with you. If you have any questions, please reach out to me in the comments, and would love to hear your comments as well, and any discussion or dialogue that you'd like to have. Would be I'd be very interested in that. So without further delay or rambling or mumbling, as it were, by me, let's begin. This week's portion is Beha'alotecha. It is from Bamidbar, from Numbers, chapter 8, verse 1 through chapter 12, verse 16. In this portion, I'll just go through and summarize the portion briefly. We have Moses giving instructions on the care of the lamps. Adonai giving the instructions to Moses how the high priest should take care of the lamps. Interesting language here that the lighting is specifically in front of the menorah, to light the front of the menorah, to cast its light down onto the ground in front of the menorah, in a sense. Then the parsha goes on to discuss the Levi'im, the people of Levi, being consecrated and purified and set aside for the service of the tent of the meeting and the service of the people, is the language of it. They will enter and do this inside the tent of the meeting. They will do the service of the lamps and of the bread and these things, taking care of the elements inside the tent of meeting. Adonai says, I have taken the Levi'im as a firstborn of Israel, that they are to be a wave offering to him, that they belong to him, and that they are to do the service of the people of Israel. When they reach the age of 25 is when they begin their service, begin their work. Then follows some instructions about the observing of Pesach, and what was of keen interest to us earlier this year, that there were some who, because they were exposed to a dead body, were not clean to observe the Pesach, and that Adonai reemphasized the laws of the Pesach, and then explained that while these men had become unclean, they were to observe the Pesach on Pesach Sheni, which was following the original Pesach date, another date that was established. But again, the same law for the foreigner and for the native, that Passover applies to the ger, the goyim. It applies to the foreigner. Otherwise, why would you have the law applied to the foreigner? And that everything that Passover is somehow significant and relevant to the life of the foreigner, which is why these laws and commandments are there, in order to facilitate the foreigner being able to enter into the Passover, which of course we understand in these days, because the salvation offered to Israel has become the salvation offered to the earth, that the atonement offered to Israel has become the atonement offered to the earth, and so on and so forth. Okay. Then we go on with the discussion of the Mishkan how the cloud covered it by day and the cloud appeared as fire by night. Whenever the cloud went up, the Mishkan was moved, and whenever it came down, they did not move. They settled in their camp. And the Torah says that it was, whether it was 2 days, a month, or a year, that the cloud would stay in a place. That was where they stayed for any length of time. Then they are instructed to make 2 trumpets of hammered silver for summoning the community, gathering the community together. One is sounded just for the leaders, and both is sounded for everyone for their commencement, for their marching out. They sound the alarm of the 2 trumpets when you go to war, it says, so that Adonai will remember you. So these are the gathering that they have. They've crafted the 2 trumpets. And then it says the 20th of the 2nd month of the 2nd year, the people set out in their stages from the Sinai desert. So consider this. This is it. This is the moment of departure. This is what we've all been waiting for, to go from the slavery of Egypt and to enter into the land finally. And finally we've set out. And we have definitely become a people. The Mishkan has been completed. And there should really be nothing left other than the journey into Canaan, the promised land. So they set out in stages, and it's an 11-day journey. It says in Devarim, it's an 11-day journey. Chapter 1 of Deuteronomy. It is 11 days journey from Horeb by way of Mount Seir to Kadesh Barnea. Now Moses spoke to Bnei Israel according to all Adonai had commanded him for them, in the 40th year, in the 11th month, on the 1st day of the month. So it's an 11-day journey, and yet we're marking the moment. It's the 40th year. In other words, by the time they got ready to go in to this land, they had been wandering for some 40 years. We think of it as a 40-year journey. We think of the context of Egypt to Sinai, to the Promised Land, to Canaan. We think of that in terms of a 40-day epoch of history, a span of history. It's a 40-day window in the history of our people. And that's how we look at that. That's how we think in those terms. That's our contextualizing of what that timeline looks like. But I think we need to look at Bamidbar numbers. At this point in the text, it truly is an 11-day journey. Everything was being prepared for the journey, and when the journey began, it was going to be an 11-day journey. I think that's important for us to understand some of the expressions later on. But at this point, they've set out. Then we have this odd interlude between Moses and either it's his father-in-law or it's the son of his father-in-law. The contemporary and ancient commentators are pretty set and pretty universal on this Kovev or Hovav, depending on your translation, how it's written in English. The son of Reuel is, excuse me, he's leaving to go home, and it's whether or not this discussion is around whether or not this is Jethro, whom in the Hebrew would be pronounced Yitro, or it's the son of Jethro. But the commentators are pretty fixed on it being indeed being Jethro by a different name, Chovev. He's leaving to go home. And presumably, after 2 years of preparations, Moses begs him to stay. He says, "No, I'm going back to my home country." And Moses says, "You can be our eyes, you know the country." This part is perplexing for me because truly Adonai was leading them. We had this expression, this description that Adonai was leading them by the cloud and by the light of the fiery cloud at night. And so Adonai is going to lead them. Why is Moses looking to recruit this Chovev, whether it's Jethro or not, Yitro or not? Why is Moses recruiting him to be a sort of guide through the desert? Moses repeats his entreaty, his request, and says this: whatever Adonai does good for us, we will do the same for you. It's almost an inversion. It's almost a proactive variation on whatever do unto others as you'd have them do unto you, in a sense. We're going to do good for you because Adonai is going to do good for us. It's proactive in that sense. And we begin to get a glimpse into Moses' heart here. He wants to share the blessings that Adonai has for Israel with Hophab, with the Midianite. This is a sense in which Moses' generosity and kindness is being expressed here. The other thing that has to be noted is that Moses lived for 40 years in Jethro's house, taking care of his sheep. And this term, chovev, is endearing one, or dear one, or beloved one. Would be how you would describe that word. And the suggestion is that perhaps this was a name that Moses wrote in for Yitro, expressing his affection and love for him. Chovev, the beloved one, the one that is dear to me. So we have this, the ark sets out, verse 35, whenever the ark would set out, Moses would say, "Arise, Adonai, may your enemies be scattered, may those who hate you flee from before you." And then when they stopped, verse 36, whenever they came to a stop, he would say, "Return, Adonai, to the myriad thousands of Israel." And so this is the paradigm, this is the context under which they travel on this journey. Remember, in the proper contextualizing of it, it is an 11-day journey. So this is how they're going to set out, and it's an 11-day journey. In chapter 11, though, we have a bit of a breakdown on a number of levels. First of all, the people begin to grumble, it says. And then it says, next, they complained. So they began by grumbling about some unwritten, unnamed sort of complaint. And next they complained about an easier life. This is from a bunch of ex-slaves. They complained about the food. They complained about how they wanted the foods that they had in Egypt. And we've talked at length about this idea that the foods they had in Egypt was a devil's bargain. They had sold their soul for bread, for food from Egypt. So what a terrible thing that they were pining away for the foods of Egypt. So Moses complains to Adonai. Moses complains and says to Adonai, "Why have you brought trouble on your servant? Haven't I found favor in your eyes, that you laid the burden of all these people upon me? Did I conceive all these people? Did I give birth to them, that you should say to me, carry them in your bosom, just as the nurse carries the infant to the land you promised to their fathers?" These references to a newborn, to an infant, conceiving, bringing birth, giving birth, and then carrying them in your bosom as a nurse carries an infant. How does a nurse carry an infant in her bosom? It's nursing. "Where can I get meat for all these people?" Moses says to Adonai, "for they wail to me, saying, 'Give us meat to eat.' I'm not able to carry all these people by myself. The load is too heavy for me. If this is how you are treating me, kill me now. If I have found favor in your eyes, kill me, please. Don't let me see my own misery." How does Adonai respond to this complaint by Moses? Adonai says to Moses, "Bring me 70 elders of Israel, whom you know to be elders of the people and their leaders." This is verse 16 of chapter 11. Verse 16, "Take them to the tent of meeting so they may stand with you there. Then I will come down and speak with you there, and I will take some of the ruach that is on you and place it on them. Then I will carry with you the burden of the people, so you will not be carrying it alone." What is fascinating about this episode to me is that these 70 did indeed receive the ruach, it says, and they did indeed prophesy then, in that moment, but it says they never again prophesied. And 2 men of these 70 did not come out to receive the ruach, but stayed in the camp instead, and they were prophesying in the camp. And Joshua, among others, were making note of this to Moses in indignation. In response to their complaint, so they stayed in the camp and prophesied. In response to the people's complaint about food, backing up to that issue, the issue of the complaining about food, in response to that, wanting meat to eat, Adonai sent quail until they were sick of quail. There were 3 feet of dead quail for miles and miles surrounding the camp. Then we have the episode. This is all just under the category of summary, if you will. Then we have the episode of Miriam and Aaron criticizing Moshe on account of his Midianite wife, saying this, Adonai has spoken with us too, not just with Moses. We have this man Moshe was very humble, more so than anyone on the earth. This is how Adonai describes Moses. He is the most humble person on the earth, and he is described this way in context with this complaint by Aaron and Miriam. Verse 6 of chapter, I think this is chapter 12, right? Or chapter 11, I'm sorry. Verse 6, hear now my words, he said. When there is a prophet of Adonai, I reveal myself in a vision, I speak to him in a dream. Not so with my servant Moses. In all my house he is faithful. I speak with him face to face, plainly and not in riddles. He even looks at the form of Adonai. Why then were you not afraid to speak against my servant Moses? And this is the response that Adonai gives to Aaron and Miriam. When the cloud was removed from the tent of meeting where the 3 of them were standing, we see Miriam covered in leprosy, so much so that she looked like a stillborn child. We've talked at length about this juxtaposition of leprosy and the stillborn child. So that concludes the summary of the Parsha, getting us down through the Parsha, and the next week's Parsha is Shlach Lecha, which has to do with the spies being sent into the land and our great disappointment there. So the theme that I'd like to explore a little bit with you this week is the theme of this Jethro, or Yitro, however you pronounce it in the Hebrew. Look at the pattern. In Exodus, the people are many, and Moses can't manage them. And Yitro comes along, and he's a help. He wants to help for what he needs. They add some helpers to Moses. They divide the people by these helpers. And then we have Moses asking Jethro to stay. Jethro is going back to his home, but there's a moment there where they're together, and I would think you'd have the question, would you consider staying? And indeed, I think that's what Moses does ask Jethro here. In Bamidbar, in Numbers, and that's all takes place in Exodus. In Bamidbar, in Numbers, in the current Parsha, we have this. The people are many. Moses is overwhelmed. Adonai brings relief with some suggestions to divide up the burdens. Are we noticing anything? Do we notice a parallel here? That is that when Jethro comes and gives Moses some suggestions, doing it in a place where Moses was overwhelmed, and the suggestions are to divide up the people and to delegate. And this is what we see in this. But here we've got an echo of that Moses is approaching him again to stay. The people are many. Moses is overwhelmed by virtue of this passage here. And Adonai brings some relief with this suggestion to divide up the burdens. Almost the same advice as what Jethro gave. Yet we see that some of these men were worthless. They did not bear the burdens of Moses in the long term. Moses is called humble in the episode of Aaron and Miriam complaining. Jethro sets up a practical or technical leadership. in his idea of dividing up the people and bringing them to assigning them perhaps to different representatives who would judge on their behalf and judge for their interest. All right. So what we say is that Jethro is setting up practical or technical leadership, and but Adonai is setting up something different. He's setting up a different paradigm. The plan of Yitro and then again Chovev are both faulty because the people weren't cooperative. It's easy to force people to do something that they're going to go along and do. If people just are abjectly uncooperative, it can make life very difficult to influence or to impact people or to lead people. Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, Chief Rabbinate of the UK, talks about this distinction between technical leadership versus adaptive leadership. The technical details we see played out in Exodus, and the adaptive details being played out on a different level. The technical details are all over Exodus. Look what we have in Exodus. In the book of Exodus, we have the problem of the slavery and persecution, the death of the sons and so on. We have the problem, and then we have to find out how to fix it. We have to find out what to do about it. And so Exodus goes through and walks through, first of all, this confrontation with Pharaoh, and then walks through this leaving of the land and wandering through the desert and arriving at the Sea of Reeds. And the technical leadership is going to take care of, fill in the blank, everything. Personal leadership is a little more nuanced. Personal leadership is becoming a man of God and being a man of God that impacts people's lives, that influences people's lives. That's more difficult to exercise. It's more difficult to learn. Personal leadership is being willing to acknowledge people's need and their neediness, and how that all gets accomplished is absolutely within the realm of the guidance of the Word of God, as expressed here in this paradigm or in this system, where in Exodus we have this extensive technical leadership that's going on. All the technical details of building the Mishkan, the technical details of all the lavers and basins and utensils that they would use, the technical details in the walls of the Mishkan. All these things we see detailed explicitly in Exodus. But in Bamidbar, it's much more nuanced. Personal leadership, I believe, is being willing to acknowledge people's need and their neediness and their poverty and their brokenness, their powerlessness. This is the first step to being a leader. Not a technical leader, but a personal leader. Acknowledging people's need in these areas, and how poverty and brokenness have wreaked havoc on society, especially in the way that it's expressed right now. Right now, we have a resistance in our culture, in our society. We have a resistance to adaptive leadership. And that expresses itself in the animus and the anger that is felt in certain communities, that they are subjugated and subjected to unfairness and inequality. And the first kind of three knee-jerk reactions to that is the denial, anger, and blame. To deny that there's a problem, to blame somebody else for the problem, and to be angry about it. We see those things and blame. We see those things expressed on the news channels when they're interviewing people that are involved in these tensions and outbursts and protests around the world. I think quite extensively in North America, but it's around the world as well. So we see this denial, anger, and blame as sort of resistance. They're sort of bastions. They're sort of high towers of defense within the people that allows them to dig in their heels and become entrenched, and also, unfortunately, allows for a pretty significant measure of what would otherwise just be inappropriate to expose them to. So this is what we see in our culture right now. This resistance is the resistance is a pushback, and the resistance is effective at shutting down technical leadership. This is what I mean. Take, for example, the current issue with racial tension in our nation. If I come into the intersection of these tensions with a technical solution, the response of denial, anger, and blame that's on the table, that's being leveraged at everything, is going to be effective at shutting down whatever benefit there is to whatever I wanted to do. So what happens is, say, for example, a governor decides, well, from now on we're going to have free health care for the entire African American ethnicity group, etc., in North America. They're going to have free health care. That doesn't address the injustice, that doesn't address the violence, that doesn't address the fundamental complaint. It may be in somebody's laundry list of things they'd like to get fixed during all this, but what we see is that the resistance pushes back against that and is effective at killing that. So if a governor decides to give free health care, the fact that people are still in denial about certain aspects of what happened or what is happening, people are angry about it, people are blaming about it, you're going to find yourself very ineffective at bringing change to the world. Okay, so in this sense, what I'm suggesting to you is that what we're missing is not technical leadership on the global or national scale. What we're missing is adaptive leadership. And that means that adaptive leadership, or this sort of connection with people's struggle and connection with where people are at, is much more effective, because you're connecting with who people are. You're connecting with their identity and their story, and it's a learned skill, but I think it's one that's very, very important. But it can be tricky to get started with it. See, we all default to technical solutions. We may enter into the conversation, but it doesn't take long, and we're like, oh, I can't deal with all this trauma. How about just tell me where I send money? How do we solve this? Just tell me what to do. Who do I need to vote for? Unfortunately, again, just to say, the technical solutions are never effective at really answering denial, anger, and blame. All right, we have this in Joshua: be strong and courageous, to keep and obey. To be strong and courageous. We're going to look at that in terms of leadership a little bit here. Personal leadership, Rabbi Jonathan Sachs called it adaptive leadership. I might call it personal leadership. And personal leadership is about becoming first and foremost a man of God. See, that's why it's so much more difficult. Being a personal leader, a personal leadership is where you become fit for the intersection of people's resistance and anger and blame and violence as they collide with the rest of society. And your standing in that intersection, your effective standing in that intersection, is going to be based on your disciplines and your spiritual maturity. Because this is my theory, this is what I'm saying, that personal leadership is about becoming the man of God. So personal leadership is also about being willing to acknowledge people's needs and neediness, to acknowledge people's poverty and brokenness. Adaptive leadership means you're willing to adapt what is needed from you. You are the one who is adapted. You're the one who's being adapted to this role which fits these people. Personal leadership is being willing to acknowledge other people's needs and neediness, but also to acknowledge our own blessings and to acknowledge our own struggles within this intersection. Let me just walk through this with you. The people needed Moshe. They needed Moses in Exodus. They needed him to be the technical leader. And then in Numbers we see that they need Moses to be an adaptive leader. His chair is well, let me start this way. The character of the man of God is his standing and his basis for his position in the intersection of all these issues. The people needed Moses to be a technical leader in the beginning, but they needed him to be an adaptive leader or a personal leader as he went along. He's working on character in himself as a leader, more so dealing with issues of crisis management and these things. But what is it that's needed today in our society, from COVID to race tensions? What is it that we need? We need leadership. Leadership is defined as the ability to make an impact, to impact people. And here's another layer of this, going even deeper into this. The technical details can all be washed out. If somebody really does have a technical complaint, if there's a protest going on downtown and you get to the heart of the matter and they say, well, we just want more playgrounds. We just want more playgrounds. Or we want a playground in our neighborhood. There's no playground in our neighborhood. Well, that's a technical solution that we could probably work on and probably fix. The technical details can be wrestled out, but the real issues are always emotional. In other words, in that moment when you're navigating this dialogue with people who are protesting, I know you understand this, but do you see, the real issues are always emotional. Your emotions get bound up and wound up into these things. From Joshua chapter 1, we have this. Now it came about after the death of Moses, the servant of Adonai, that Adonai spoke to Joshua son of Nun, Moses' aide, saying, my servant Moses is dead. So now arise, you and all these people, and cross over Jordan to the land that I am giving to them, to Bnei Israel. So this is the moment when they're settling in. Remember, we talked about the 11-day journey versus the 40-year journey. This is the culmination of that journey. They're ready to walk into the land. And as they begin to walk into this land, we have this, that Adonai is saying to Joshua, arise now. And he says this in verse 6, Chazak, be strong, for you will lead these people to inherit the land which I swore to your fathers to give them. Only be very strong and resolute to observe diligently the Torah which Moses my servant commanded you. Do not turn from it to the right or the left, so you may be successful wherever you go. Verse 8, this book of the Torah should not depart from your mouth. You are to meditate on it day and night, so that you may be careful to do everything written in it. For then I will make your ways prosper, and then you'll be successful. Verse 9, here I am not, have I not commanded you, Chazak, be strong. Do not be terrified or dismayed, for Adonai, your God, is with you wherever you go. Notice that he says that this Chazak, be strong, over and over again. Chazak, be strong and courageous, it'll say in some of your translations. Leadership is all about character, and Joshua's character apparently needs some work in being strong and courageous. But look at the context for this being strong and courageous. Verse 7, only be very strong and resolute to observe diligently the Torah which Moses my servant commanded you. Be strong and courageous and to observe, to keep the Torah. My servant commanded you, do not turn from it to the right or to the left, so you may be successful wherever you go. So this is what we have, is a connection of this be strong and courageous exhortation, connecting that to the law of Adonai. Leadership is all about character. The character of Moses was identified in this parsha as the most humble man on the earth. And this is the description of Moses. And leadership is all about character, but it's not character that's soft or non confrontational, if you will. And by confrontation, I don't mean like friction or conflict. I mean just the confrontation, the connection, the confrontation of different forces in the moment. So this is what we have, that Moses was the most humble man, as identified from Adonai. He's assigned by Adonai, this humble man is assigned by Adonai into these great moments in history. So this is what we have. The part that I wanted to bring out to your attention specifically and in detail was indeed this parallel between Jethro 1 and Jethro 2, if you want to call it that. The Jethro out of Exodus 18, and then again the Jethro out of Bamidbar, Numbers, chapter 11. And just these two sort of echoes, these two sort of characters, and what's really happening there. I do think it's compelling that Jethro was asked to stay. He was asked to consider staying with the people of Israel to enter the land. And that's a pretty significant invitation that Moses has for them. There's a little bit of perplexity in the text when Moses says, we need you to be our ears, knowing full well that the tower of the pillar, rather, of the cloud and the pillar of fire are more than adequate to guide them, that we still have this request to use this chovev, whether that's the son of Jethro, or if it's Jethro by another name. But this parallel between Jethro 1, Jethro 2, and then of course the permutation of this when we conclude all this, first of all, by setting out and beginning the journey and making the journey, but also by the conclusion of going into the promised land. This man was ultimately humble and absolutely humble. There is a certain amount of humility that is needed in order to enter the presence of Adonai, and there's a certain amount of humility that is the surface of Adonai, if that makes sense. So we may have to to walk through that a little bit anyway. So that's what we have here. That this Chovev was asked to stay, I think, is an expression of Moses' love for the foreigner and for the ger. And what would you provide for the foreigner in an invitation manner? You couldn't give them a corner, a piece of land. You couldn't give them anything because you don't have anything to give. You're a tribe wandering in the desert. You have very little. And yet you desperately do want people like this, whether it be Chovev, Jethro, or his son. You would definitely want them with you in some capacity or another. But again, this humility is the one that's identified as humble, is the one who is in the context, in proximity to power. And this is what we see in this, is that Moses indeed has this proximity to power. And we find ourselves with Aaron and Adonai bringing about, Aaron and Miriam complaining to Adonai, and giving Adonai this almost a chance to prop up, to celebrate Moses in his position, his role with Adonai is different than the role that was offered. This is a sense, the expression of their rejection of Moses as the man of humility and the man of God, which absolutely puts him in the place of leadership, because leadership is impact, leadership is influence, and especially at this level, we're beyond technical details now, and now we're getting into the refining of personal details. All right, so I'm going to leave it there. It's been a delight, of course, as always, with you. If you have any questions, please leave those with us in the comment section, and reach out to me if you like. And if there's anything I can do for you, please let me know. May the Lord bless you and keep you this week and give you just a week of delight, and hopefully we'll see you on Shabbat. Shalom, shalom.